I don't necessarily think DeSantis would be a step back in terms of Bush era politics, and it's not because of Ron DeSantis. Okay, so it's not because of Ron DeSantis' past. There are plenty of things that are concerning about his foreign policy record, and there's plenty of things concerning about his backers, his donors, and what have you. I don't think the Republican Party, as it currently stands, would let him be that bad on foreign policy.
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
All right, everybody. Of course, there he goes already. My dog ruining the podcast. This is episode 168 of In Liberty and Health. Today, I have Kenny Cody with me. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, brother. How are you? How are you doing tonight?
Excellent. It's kind of getting a little bit nicer here in Pennsylvania. It's cold, but not too cold. So like good enough that I don't hate my life and it hurts to exist when you're outside. Yeah, man. So anyways, give a brief introduction of yourself, who you are and what you do. I've read a few of your articles and seen you on a few podcasts, and I enjoyed every single one of them. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I know it's a long way to just ask you for an introduction, but yeah, take it away.
I appreciate it, Kyle. My name is Kenny Cody. I'm a columnist for a couple of different websites. So the National Pulse is kind of what I put a few pieces out more recently, but I usually have pieces featured in newsmax.com, townhall.com, the Washington Examiner. I've had a couple pieces published in the Tennessean, in the Knoxville News Sentinel. So conservative columnist, also the chairman of the Cocke County GOP here in Cocke County, Tennessee, in East Tennessee. I'm the Southern director for the Republicans for National Renewal, which is a national populist-leaning organization designed to lead the right kind of Republicans into elected office. And I'm an economics teacher, actually, at my high school in East Tennessee, my alma mater, Cosby High School. 27 years old. Well, I'm 27 years old. I'm 26, about to be 27 years old. Just kind of a young guy. We got involved in freelance conservative columning or freelancing overall back about probably 3 years ago. I wrote a little bit in college, but nothing really professional and nothing of opinion until a couple of years ago. But started being the conservative movement, man. Prime member of the GOP, prime member of the Republican Party, and just trying to get the right kinds of Republicans elected, because God knows I have my qualms and my qualms with each of them. So.
Yeah, of course. I think as we all do. So I would consider myself an anarcho-capitalist at heart, and I know that you fancy yourself a libertarian as well, but you see the Republican Party as the most viable strategy, which I've had my mind changed on quite a bit over the last year, especially ever since starting this podcast and the conversations I've had with many incredible people, and obviously some of the conversations that you've had as well has kind of given me a good look on it. And what I've come to appreciate about you in particular, listening to you on Brian Nichols' show, is that you have, and with Larry Sharp, that was right, you have a very somber look at politics, and you don't get very emotional. And it is something that's very emotional, but what I respect about you is that you're not just this hyperbolic, hyper-partisan kind of person. You lay out the polling and the data and the things that you understand about the party clearly and kind of make your judgment calls from there, which sounds boring and not sexy to most people. But for me, I've been political most of my life, but I really started studying nutrition research recently. And that really has given me a bigger appreciation for people who are able to, parse through data and make conclusions based on that rather than just their feelings. So I know I threw a little bit of a lot at you there, but I just want to say I appreciate your outlook. So was there any kind of thing that really attracted you to the Republican Party versus the Libertarian Party?
Just to be quite honest, man, in the East Tennessee, and especially Tennessee in particular, there are two parties, right? And I'm willing to admit in my own county, we're an 80-20 county Republican-wise. And
sure.
But to see the amount of change and to see the amount of I guess moreover, just changing a voice when in the Republican Party has kind of let me know that people can change it. I mean, if you look at the example that I always point to, and one of my main topics and one of my main issues that I concentrate on more than anything is foreign policy. And I'm an anti-war guy, anti-interventionist. Wasn't always like that, really, probably until I got into my adulthood and started, reading people like Scott Horton. But to see the Republican Party go from voting 100% for the AUMF to seeing around 46 to 50 Republicans in the U.S. Congress vote for the repeal in 2022, 2021, I'm sorry, kind of lets me know that it could change really quickly, and that people like me, and I'm not just saying like me, but people of my like mindset can have a real impact on what the party would be. Because I think we all, like libertarians, populists, even some moderates and neoconservatives, can all agree that the scope of government is far too large. And I think that through seeing how fast the Republican Party has changed on so many issues, even from 2016 till now, people don't realize how short of a year and how short of a time period 7 years really is in terms of a Republican Party that's been here for 200 years. I think you can have a real impact if you just look at the issues and how to appeal to people. And I know that the word populist oftentimes gets a negative connotation, and trust me, I understand why. You think economic populism, you think the Republicans that embrace like universal health care and tax and higher taxes on billionaires and things like that. I know that word's very toxic to some people, but to me, all populism is just a way to appeal to people's problems, right? Like identifying problems that everyday Americans are struggling with and finding the solutions for whatever your philosophy is. I mean, our philosophy is less government. And the definition of populism itself is the elite versus the common man, right? And the elite doesn't have to be billionaires. It doesn't have to be, and although it sometimes is, I mean, the elite sometimes big tech, it's these big corporations, and sometimes it is billionaires and millionaires. But the way I always define it, and how the Republican Party is continuing to define it, is things like the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, these powerful politicians in DC that dictate every single portion of our lives. And even at the state level, I mean, during the COVID-19 policy, the elite wasn't billionaires during COVID-19. The elite was the state government-led authoritarians that were cracking down and trapping us in our homes. That's who the elite are. That's who the elite always has been, is these people who are in power, whether it is millionaires, whether it is billionaires, whether it is large government bureaucrats. They are the elite, not the common man. So when I hear populism, I don't think badly. And I think that's where the Republican Party is kind of going, is knowing what kind of issues matter to people and identifying what issues matter to people. Because for so many years, it seems like the Republicans were always the bankers, right? Like to the common man, to the independent, the Republicans are who you trust with your money and nothing else. Right. But now on culture issues, on CRT, on anti-Marxism and trying to be anti-progressive, anti-leftism as a cultural phenomenon, Republican Party is really starting to kind of figure out that people don't like this stuff. Like the independent voter they're not crazy, they're not leftist, they're not progressive, they're just normal people. And I think a lot of the left and a lot of the Democrats are trying to make it about an adaptation to cultural Marxism, and the Republicans are finally going, no, like we're all about small government and things like that, but you're not just going to expose my child to this kind of stuff, whether it's in a public setting, a publicly funded infrastructure, or a public school system, or a private school system. Like we're not going to allow you to pretty much infiltrate our children's minds with this cultural Marxism. So Republicans are finally adapting to the culture. And I think that for so many years, we were just like, all right, we don't care what you do. We don't care what you do. Don't do this to my, whatever. But now we're kind of going like, all right, like we're very pro less government. I am very pro less government, but I'm also protected by my family. And when I eventually do have a wife, and when I eventually do have children, I want those people protected. And I think that Republicans are trying to find that fine line between as less government as possible while still winning that sort of cultural war that Republicans have to fight at this point. It's nothing that we want to fight. We don't want to be fighting for our children in the trenches, but we have to at this point, right? So trying to understand what people care about, trying to make sure that people know the Republicans are not just solely about money, but we're about fighting on behalf of you against the government. And I think that's kind of what my direction for the party is, at least for now.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and a lot of stuff I also kind of want to unpack. So let's start with first things first, as you brought up foreign policy. I do like the fact that at least one of the talking points surrounding Donald Trump was that he didn't start any new wars. But I feel like a lot of his big foreign policy blunders kind of go unnoticed, where we have the military build up against China, who Biden has accelerated way more than Trump ever did. The trade wars, which was paid for a majority by Americans. I mean, there was a report done that said Americans paid for 94% of the tariffs. And I think you laid out, and I'm going to assume that you weren't in favor of tariffs, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but there were also some stuff down in South America. And I'm not saying that you're for any of this stuff, but this is something that's kind of made me very reluctant to give full-throated endorsements to the Republican Party, because I see a lot of stuff that I like, but it just seems like this China hawkishness and this Iran hawkishness, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, it really pushes me away from them, because a lot of their claims about both of these countries fall apart under very, very minimal scrutiny. And these are wars that would just be absolutely catastrophic for, the American government and Americans as a whole. So to you, what would you advise people do who kind of want to change the party? Would you say they should get involved, or how could we kind of move them a little bit more towards the Ron Paul-esque approach? Or do you feel like maybe I'm incorrect here? I'm open to, whatever your thoughts are.
I think there's a few different things that I would say. So for one, I don't think the tariffs have worked, and we haven't seen evidence that they've worked. So until the policy works in trade, then I'm against it, right? But one thing that I would encourage in terms of China hawkishness, and I'm not for any sort of intervention with it when it comes to foreign policy, but ban foreign land ownership in the United States. Like, there's no reason the CCP should be owning land in Tennessee.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, go ahead.
They own less than 0.5% of all the land in the
Sure.
United States. And there are plenty of other countries in Europe who own way, way more, and Canada owns more than China.
Yes,
so
they do.
My problem with this is that they solely focus on China, who actually they require a lot of importing in order to kind of even run their economy.
Sure.
So it's just really convenient that the military industrial complex's main target is China, and they laid this out very, very clearly. And once again, and I'm not trying to pin you into this corner, but
no, you're good.
It's just they carry water for literally the worst people in this regards, and they just focus on China when there's other countries that do the same things, but we just always focus on China, who just so happens to be the military industrial complex's main target. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just fine. It's frustrating for me, because I want to like these people, but
I understand your point. It's just when we have a lot of evidence in terms of like TikTok, for example, right? Like TikTok, if you look at the terms and services of the application, it's damning, right? Like all this information, the app tracing, the keyboard strokes, and everything that they track. I mean, it's insane.
That private information is stored in servers here in the U.S., though. That's as of recently.
Absolutely, they do. But the problem is they're not owned by the United States government, just like they're owned by the Chinese government, and
they're owned by ByteDance.
And that's mainly my problem is when I see these countries that have private land ownership with Canada and everything. Now I'm against a lot of it in general, and don't get me wrong. If they have human rights violations and they're stealing information from Americans and they're using it against us, then yes, I'm all for foreign land ownership in general. I didn't just say China foreign land ownership, but if they're invading on privacy rights like the NSA does, then I'm all for banning whatever country's foreign land ownership.
We agree.
And that's my thing is, and the thing about it, Kyle, you said that that they own less than, I think you said like 3 or 4%. Then I don't see a problem in banning them if they own that little. I mean Bill Gates is. I would like us to ban Bill Gates from owning farmland too. So I mean it's not just there's nothing that I want to trigger China to have this sort of military intervention. I don't want us to get involved in the Taiwanese war. I don't want us to put boots. There's a lot of Republicans, and I'm against those too, that want to put boots on the ground to protect Taiwan. I don't want to do that in the same reason I don't want to protect Ukraine from Russia. I mean, in the same way. But ultimately, it's hard for me to sit here and say and be as anti-nanny state as I am. I'm very anti-NSA. I'm anti-FBI. I'm anti-CIA, invading on privacy rights, right? In that same way, I want to make sure that China is not doing the same thing to Americans and trying to ban it in that same way. I don't want privacy rights about. That's what I want the church committee that Thomas Massey is going to lead in the U.S. Congress, hopefully in this next session. So I'm for whatever. Right, he's fantastic, and I hope that McCarthy tabs him as the leader of the church committee or the chairman of the church committee. Right. So in that same way that I want those rights protected and I want those violations to be out in the American public, I'm all for protection of privacy rights for Americans. So if that means banning China, who is using our information against us overseas, or that's against the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI doing the same thing and invading privacy rights where we can't even be safe in our own homes and feel safe that we're not being spied on by our own government, no matter what kind of privacy we're protecting, whether it's our own government or a foreign one, I'm for protection. And I think that's an understanding where I tell people this all the time. I am not anti-defense. Right. Like if an American is being harmed, I'm for retaliation.
Absolutely.
No matter what. Right. Yes. Like, and that's, I think, where anti-interventionists and are called anti-isolationists a lot of the time is when we start saying we're for any fight back. We're against defense. Like that's the point where we kind of lose credibility as anti-war people. Right. Yes. So if I cannot sit here and tell and explain I was a debater in college, and when I have to explain my positions to people and I have to say I am for protecting the privacy rights of Americans. That's why I'm NSA. That's why anti-NSA, CIA, nanny state, whatever. I can't then sit here simultaneously and go, well, I don't want to punish China and I don't want to ban ownership from China when they're the ones also doing the spying. I can't be okay with China doing it through applications that our children are having on their phones, that 12 and 13-year-olds have on their phones, and information that my hypothetical child is giving over to the Chinese government. I can't say I don't want to do anything about that and at the same time be anti-NSA. I have to be consistent. And that's one thing that I wish Republicans would be is intellectually consistent. And if I am anti-nanny state, if I do want to protect privacy rights, I have to be for the protection against both. And that's my main reason that why people like Blake Masters and others have talked about banning land ownership from the Chinese, the CCP. When we see these human rights violations and we see these privacy right violations of Americans happening at our own whim, our own funding, and our celebrities, our corporations here in the United States actually making TikTok accounts and promoting the application on the World Wide Web and on television. When this is being promoted in our culture, we have to do something about it. And I'm not going to say that we shouldn't do something against the nanny state as well. We have to be intellectually consistent, and that's why I'm for protecting privacy rights of Americans on both sides.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very long time, and they run awesome sales and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got red velvet cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, Fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180 calories. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important. So make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a very understandable position. I overall agree with you. I don't think people should use TikTok, but I just can't say I've seen any damning evidence that China is using that information. I mean, what are they going to do? Sell this microphone for a little bit cheaper? And I mean, maybe there's something I'm missing here, but once again, all the info that they have access to is the info that they could see on your Facebook or stuff like that. Because once again, we worked out the deal. I think it was over a couple months ago where all that private information is once again stored on US servers. And then there was actually a situation where a few employees had hacked in and actually got to some private information. They were immediately fired from the company. So, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, but once again, if there's something I'm missing here, I'm very careful about this, and I try to approach this as I would approach anything else. Like, could I prove this in a court of law? And to me, it seems like there isn't a lot of evidence for this, but a lot of people wave their hands about it, and it's any last little thing that China does, we're going to pick up on it and try to poke them in the eyes.
Well, like I said, I understand that point, and I would have to see more evidence before I'm willing to support a policy where, okay, we're going to ban this state's ownership, we're going to ban this farmland, whatever.
Right.
But I think that we have to have sort of this protectionist ideology in saying, okay, what is the land going to be used for? right? Like we
Okay,
don't
yeah,
want to just
that's
sell
totally
land
fair.
in general, and that's not happening right now.
Yeah.
Like can me or you sit here and tell us why Bill Gates is buying farmland in Kansas? Like that's no, like we have no
It's
proof.
probably not good though. We
Right,
can
it's
assume.
probably not good, and the vast majorities of land, like
Yeah.
like if a duck quacks, what is it going to be? It's a duck, right? So we have to kind of look at what the purpose of this is going to be.
Absolutely.
CCP
Yes.
is purchasing land for bad reasons, okay,
Right.
to get an upper hand on the American economy, to get an upper hand on the American citizen.
Yeah.
Let's ban it, right? Like that's not a hard position to take, but
No, I don't think so either.
yeah, so that's sort of where I am. Is
Sure.
if I've seen enough to where I think that their intent is going to be bad. There's no because it's a privilege to own land here in the United States, right? There's plenty. I don't own land, right? Like I'm a school teacher. I don't own land, so if there's reasons why I can't own land for whether it's expenses or laws or whatever, nobody's going to be willing to sell it to me. I should be allowed to own it. So I don't believe it's that hard of a position to take, especially if it's a minute part of the ownership of the United States. Let's ban it just in case, like right, I just think that we have seen so many sort of revelations about the CCP. I mean, whether it's their encampments of Uyghur Muslims in China, whether it's their banning of churches, whether it's their sort of their communist ideology of their own people, right?
Sure.
Like and their starvation of their own people. Like, I mean, they're the closest to the North Korea that's on where only that there's not rolling blackouts going on all over the country. Like they're the closest thing that we get it, and they are. I wouldn't call them a foe, but they are a threat if they ever wanted to be, right? Like if they ever did want to sort of, preempt an attack, whether it's a virtual attack, whether it's an actual militaristic attack, like they are right there, and it's very scary. So I don't want to give them an upper hand on anything because I don't want a war, and I'm very hesitant to not, sort of adapt these protectionist policies to protect the American people. And I am against militaristic intervention. I do not want boots on the ground in China or in Taiwan to protect Taiwan, whatever. Sure. I'm always going to be against that. I never want American citizens' life risk, but I also have to say, I do not want American private rights violated. So if there are policies that we can support in order to that, let's do that.
Okay, yeah. So I guess kind of in the same realm, I really enjoyed this whole Speaker of the House situation. This was something that had continued to change my mind on the Republican Party. So I think Matt Gaetz is a little bit of a goofball sometimes, but I really came to admire him after this because my joke was that a lot of Republicans will do absolutely anything to wash Trump's, private mail parts. And they're absolute partisan hacks for him. But this time when I saw, Lauren Boebert, who could be a little silly sometimes, Matt Gaetz and, Thomas Massie and what was it, like 20 other Republicans go out and go against Trump's wishes on this. I was like, holy crap, they're not a monolith just under Trump. This is something that's very, very admirable that they're doing. Another thing that was admirable, but I think was a bad move, was Marjorie Taylor Greene's decision to go all in on Kevin McCarthy. So, there's two respects to this. It's very admirable to see her stand up against her peers and do something that she knows is unpopular, as in, go for Kevin McCarthy against people like Matt Gaetz and people who typically vote like identically to her. But I felt like this is a bad hill to die on because Kevin McCarthy just says, well, we won't write a blank check to Ukraine, but we're going to give them $117 billion. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has been beyond amazing on that. She's one of the best Congress people on the Ukraine issue, but to see her go a full-throated endorsement for Kevin McCarthy, who has 2 Ukraine pins on his jacket, a lot of her criticisms now don't seem as legitimate because you're not putting your, somebody who's been vehemently for this war, you're not putting his feet to the fire. So I'm curious what your thoughts are and kind of how you saw that whole situation.
The speaker situation was fascinating because I think it was an essential moment in the history of the United States Congress. Sure. I mean, it was one of the first times we've seen a party hold their own accountable, which is an amazing thing to see. The people don't realize that the 20, I think it was the 22 that actually stood up against Kevin McCarthy changed the history of the United States Congress forever in the rules package. I mean, you are asking a vacation of you can hold a no confidence vote of a speaker with one vote. We saw a $75 billion cut to our defense spending. We are witnessing, 2 of the main funders of congressional campaigns, the Club for Growth and the Congressional Leadership Fund, say they're not going to get involved in primaries. They're going to leave it up to the voters more in contested swing state races. I mean, we are seeing some of the biggest changes in the history of the United States Congress because of of these 20 Mavericks. Okay. So I am with you. I thought it went a little bit more too far on some levels with Gates and Boebert and others when they just were, there was just about 4 or 6 of them left. And they're like, all right, dude, like we've got what we want. We had the policies that we wanted to have passed. It's time to just go ahead and just either, vote for them or not vote. Let's get on with it. I thought it was a little bit past probably what it should have. But in that same fashion, I think that it's also an admirable thing that some of these people wanted to plan, right? Like Thomas Massey voted for Kevin McCarthy. I don't know if you knew that or not.
It was what, the third round he finally did, right?
Yeah. So I think he didn't vote for the first one, but he finally voted for Kevin McCarthy because he pretty much said we don't have a plan. Like if Kevin McCarthy isn't the speaker. I admire Massey so much because he gets infuriated when there isn't a plan, and he gets infuriated when there isn't a set policy, and he gets infuriated when there's not clear plans made.
Because he's a genius.
Because he's fantastic.
Right.
So in the same way with Green, I think that Green and Massey kind of are like, we don't love Kevin McCarthy. Like I know she says that she endorses Kevin McCarthy and everything, but it's really like, all right, we've had months and months and months and months and months and months to prepare somebody else, whether that was Jim Jordan, whether that was Byron Donalds, whether that was Kevin Hearn. Like we had these candidates, and now we're just now decided to vote on him like 3 or 4 days for the election. Like they also taking their lumps, right? Like I guarantee Massey and Green both more than likely voted Andy Biggs for speaker in the caucus vote about 2 months ago. Like those are secret ballots, and I have no idea if they did or not. Because they never come out and then fully thrown endorsed, Biggs, but I can pretty much guarantee they did. The entire Freedom Caucus supported Biggs. So I think those two were also going, okay, let's take our lumps. We lost. Now it's time to say we're going to go against the Democrats. We're going to elect a Republican speaker.
Sure.
So that's also admirable. I admire that they were probably fully behind Andy Biggs and probably voted for him in the House Freedom Caucus, all that kind of stuff. Like they were probably all for that. But also willing to go, we lost, let's take our lamps, let's move on. So I have an admiration for both. I think Gates is fantastic. Gates is so good on so many issues, whether it's decriminalization of marijuana, whether it's anti-war, anti-interventionist foreign policy, whether it's anti-nanny state, calling for the pardon of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, and being against the extradition of Julian Assange. Like he is so great on so many issues. And I think people don't know, there are many libertarians that hate Matt Gates. I don't really know why, because he's about as a libertarian as the guys you can get besides Thomas Massey and maybe like Tim Burchett and a couple other people like that. I think it's because, like you said, he's so bombastic and so supportive of Trump. I think that's what kind of dissuades libertarians from kind of going to him. But I think there's so many members of the Freedom Caucus that are just like Chip Roy is an absolute masterclass. Like he negotiated these sorts of policies in these negotiations. But like I said, they not only changed the way the 118th Congress is going to work, but he changed the history of those negotiations, changed the history of the United States Congress, while still getting a Republican speaker elected within 3 to 4 days. Like that is so admirable. Like it is not like we struggled in not having all this fake outrage, and people do not care who the speaker is. I could have told so that they wouldn't even know when the speaker vote was, and the C-SPAN wasn't live streaming it for the world to see. Yeah. So none of DC, the only people that were worried about when the speaker was going to elect it is those bureaucrats in DC. They don't give a shit as much as me and you do. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to sit here and say that a lot of people wanted to paint it out to be an embarrassment of the Republican Party, and I thought it was completely the exact opposite. The only people that were even getting criticized on social media were the ones that was voted for McCarthy, and I think a lot of them had perfectly good reasons. Marjorie Taylor Greene hasn't been on a committee in her tenure in the Congress because she was taken off by the Democrats. Like she has not been able to serve on committee. Of course, she doesn't want to piss people off because she wants to serve her constituents. She wants to be able to come to DC and do her job. Okay, I understand that people were like, well, MTG is not part of the establishment now, and I think that's so stupid. I mean, this woman pretty much was punished by bureaucrats in DC, punished by the Democrats, has been robbed of her job. She might as well be a state representative in Georgia instead of being a member of the federal government, because she is not allowed to do her job at all because of the Democratic Congress. They took her off all of her committees. Then the only people she's allowed to even caucus with the Republicans. She doesn't do anything besides pretty much sit in her office and go to meetings because she's not allowed to do anything else as a congresswoman. I don't even understand. Like, if you're going to strip somebody of committee, you might as well take away their salary. because they're not doing anything. They're going to DC to sit in their offices and go to meetings with representatives and fundraisers. You're literally just giving her more time to fundraise and win her elections. Like it was same with Paul Gosar. It's one of the dumbest things that I've ever seen in the United States. Cars take anybody off committees, period. Whether it's Lauren Boebert, Paul Gosar, or Green, whoever's had it threatened. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen because you're literally just giving them taxpayer money for nothing. There's my rant about that. But
that's okay.
It infuriates me that there were so many Republicans on both sides of the aisle going, well, Green's part of the establishment, and now that Gates is a martyr and he's an embarrassment of the Republican Party. Thank God we're finally sharpening iron with iron. Like, we're not just seeing moderates versus firebrands going back and forth. We're finally seeing, the firebrands disagree on something, and even some moderates. I mean, Matt Rosendale, isn't this just firebrand conservative? I mean, people don't even know who Matt Rosendale is, and he's against Kevin McCarthy. I mean, you're seeing crazy support Kevin McCarthy. You're seeing moderates, the people who are kind of in between. I mean, Chip Roy is this guy who's going on Fox News all the time and saying all kinds of crazy stuff, but he's against Kevin McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And then you're seeing somebody like Jim Jordan, who pretty much everybody knows Jim Jordan and Kevin McCarthy do not get along in any shape, form, or fashion. Pretty much anybody who pays attention to Republican politics at all knows that. And he said, all right, this is over with. I'm voting for Kevin McCarthy second round. Okay. He supported him from 2 to 15. Okay. So we're finally seeing a little bit of unification. We're finally seeing a little bit of disagreement that actually ended up in being positive. People think it's an embarrassment, and man, I just do not see it. I think it was as positive of a change. I think it was great to see debate on the House floor for once. Thank God. Like, it's always Republicans versus Democrats on most things, and we're finally saying, wow, holy cow, like the Republicans are arguing with each other about something. Thank God. Like, finally. I wish it was on war or marijuana or something, or nanny state or something else, but I'm glad to finally see debate and discourse. As a former debater, it's good to see that on the House floor, and especially intra-party stuff. We never said Democrats would argue about anything. Like, it was like when the squad wrote that letter about, backing off and kind of auditing and saying we don't want to support the war in Ukraine anymore. And as soon as Pelosi said no, and they withdrew the letter. Like that is what we're so used to seeing out of the Republicans, is like we have to put the crazies on the outskirts and move forward. But these 20 people stood up and said, nope, we're not against the status quo. We're against Kevin McCarthy, and until you give us some for sure conservative policy solutions, we are not going to vote for him. And they got it, and he was speaker. So not only did we see debate, not only did we see negotiation, we actually saw a result out of that kind of stuff, and that's all I want to see out of Congress, are results.
Yeah, I actually didn't know some of those changes, and that's very, very admirable. And like I said, this whole situation really did kind of make me a little bit more optimistic about the Republican Party. So I guess something else I kind of wanted to talk to you about is the race here in Pennsylvania, Blake Masters and some other candidates. You seem to have a little bit more, as I was alluding to earlier, a little bit more of like a grounded, down to earth take, because it seems like everybody, the new thing is when an election doesn't go the way you like, you just say fraud until people give you enough attention and money, because this is what happened in 2020. Trump cried fraud. They raised $240 million and only spent like 40% of that on actual investigations on the election. So I'm sure the money went somewhere, but that's a lot of money and not a lot of it spent on the election. So Carrie Lake used to be this huge Obama supporter too, and now all of a sudden she's just for Trump, which seems oddly convenient. But so what were your thoughts on kind of some of these races that were a little bit more contested? Because in my mind, I'm in southwestern Pennsylvania, right? Mm-hmm. Dude, I go walk my dogs and there are Trump flags everywhere. There's a farm 5 minutes from my house. Either way, I thought for sure it was going to be Mastriano and Oz, like, in the bag, because everybody in the blue state, or everybody here, was like, we're not doing 2020 again. But I think most people like me were probably mistaken. So I know I kind of threw a lot at you, but yeah, go ahead, take it away.
No, you're fine. I mean, I have an answer to this, and I think that there's so many different things you can point out when it comes to a loss. I mean, it's just like breaking down a loss in basketball or football. I mean, there's a lot of different things that happen, but the main reason to me, and people won't like this, but the main reason to me, because they hate Trump. Okay, I think when you have a cult of personality on the ballot, like Trump, right? Like Trump is a cult of personality, and that comes with its negatives and it comes with its very positive externalities. Okay, so when Trump is running, when Trump has his candidates on the ballot and his name is also on the ballot, oh, it's over. Like, these people are going to trounce. They take back Senate seats. They take back House seats. They win. But when he's not on the ballot, these candidates lose. Okay, so look, so it's just it's very short sample size, but look at the results of 2016 and 2020. Okay, Trump lost 2020. Okay, yeah, okay, so Trump lost in 2020. He won in 2016. But don't look at those races. Look at the election night, November. Look at the election night on both of those nights. In 2016, you talk about the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Because Trump was on the ballot, because he got people out to vote, he got these independents and these Republicans who have not voted in forever or had never voted at all to come out and vote for him in 2016. 2020 happens. He loses. Okay, so I'm one of these people where I admit that I think the fraud conversation it's admirable in terms of, I think universal mail-in ballots should be banned. I don't think any COVID policy that allows people to vote from their house for any reason they want to choose should ever happen again. I think if you want to vote, you should have to go to. I think if you want to vote, you should have to go to the poll and vote. I don't believe if you're 20 years old or 25 years old, you should be able to get to cast a mail-in ballot. I think that's ridiculous. So it's not that I think the election was necessarily stolen as much as I think there were laws put in place that inherently benefited Democrats.
Sure.
And I think and not Republicans. But anyway, going back to 2020, so Trump lost the election, and yet the House saw historic gains. The Republicans didn't win the House, but they made enough of a gap to make sure that they ensure that they won the House back in 2022. Before the whole Trump situation happened, 2 Senate seats were up in a runoff in December, but we had won enough seats, and we had done well enough in the Senate elections to give us hope to win the Senate back, even though the runoffs didn't go our way. And if you look at state legislative races, if you look at gubernatorial races in 2020, Republicans did well. And because Trump candidates were on the ballot running alongside Trump, they did well. And then you look at 2018, and then you look at 2022. When Trump is not on the ballot, yet Trump candidates are running, you do not win. And that is the problem with any sort of cult of personality politician. This is just a problem with the Republican Party. It's the same reason that Obama still has not really found his successor yet. When Obama would endorse these candidates, when Obama would run in 2008, 2012, when his name's on the ballot, Democrats do decent, right? Like, they do fine. But in 2010, and in midway through his presidency, in 2014, they do not do well because Barack Obama is not on the ballot. Okay, he's not going to be on the ballot. So when you are relied upon somebody who is as bombastic, as polarizing, and motivating as Trump is, and you're running on his same policy positions, you're running on his personality, you're running on who he is, you're running as a MAGA Republican, but yet he's not there. Like, he's not there for these people to vote for. You're going to lose more than likely. And it's not Trump's fault, in my opinion. Like, in that regard, it's not his fault, because he is just endorsing the candidates that share his vision. That's been done by every politician of the last 100 to 200 years. They don't prioritize party first. They prioritize who they want to win. And I don't blame Trump for that. I just wish we would have kind of learned how to appeal more, like learned how to because Republican Party voters are not going to be at the behest of the establishment. Like, they're going to look at the candidates, and Republican Party voters oftentimes just voted in primaries and they didn't come out to vote. Like Oz lost against Fetterman, not because, Oz is a decently bad candidate, right? Mastriano, decently bad candidate, guy who was, claim stole election and stuff like that. So, you have Dr. Oz, who didn't even live in the state. You have Blake Masters, who was virtually an unknown person. Nobody had ever heard of who Blake Masters was before 2021. Are they bad candidates in general? In just terms of just checking boxes? Sure. But ask yourself the question: would Dr. Oz and Blake Masters or Doug Mastriano? I don't know about Doug Mastriano, but let's just look at Kerry Lake. Let's look at Blake Masters, and let's look at Dr. Oz. Do they win if Trump is on the ballot in a presidential election? I think so. I think ultimately they do. But in a midterm election, when Trump is basically going, vote for Oz, don't forget to vote for Oz. No, they're not going to, because on their own merits, they were bad candidates. Without Trump, they're bad candidates, let alone with him. if they still can't win. Imagine how bad they'd be without him. Like Dr. Oz has had people on his, was promoting COVID policy and was saying that, the transgender issue is a focal point in the United States health and medical issues. So, I mean, to make that guy seem like he's a true and trite Republican is insane. Although I thought it was a decent idea at the time because of name recognition, and in the same way that Herschel Walker, like people say Herschel Walker was a bad candidate. Did he end up being a bad candidate? Yes, but I mean, if you look at sports, right? Like I don't know if you're a sports fan or you aren't. But I very much am. I mean, I'm wearing a power T on my chest. See, so it would be like me running Peyton Manning here in Tennessee.
Oh, right.
That's at least what I thought originally, and then you heard Herschel Walker talk, and then you're like, okay, maybe not such a good idea. But the original idea of this hero to the Georgia people and UGA fans everywhere in the state of Georgia, like I can't sit here and say that I blame these people for being so promotional of Dr. Oz or Herschel Walker or Blake Masters. Like it just comes with politics. Polarization is the name of the game, whether it's a bad thing or whether it's a good thing. It's the reason Democrats or Republicans lose, and it's the reason they win if the other side is polarized themselves. So, I mean, I know that sounds sort of like an optimistic look at it, but I just think that I don't know if candidate quality was so much the problem as I think just politics in general is so polarized right now. And I don't know if you don't have a leader like Trump and they're not on the ballot that hardly any Republican win. I'm actually surprised with us doing as bad as we did in statewide elections besides New York and Florida. I'm honestly surprised that we actually won the House. If it wasn't for New York and Florida, and guess who New York and Florida had? They had two cults of personality in Lee Zeldin and in Ron DeSantis. That is the reason that they led their candidates and in their states to victory. Okay, George Santos won, for God's sakes. So if we look at those states and we look at how those leaders led their Republicans and led their candidates to victory, and the lack of those sorts of candidates in other states, it is not surprising to me at all that we did as poorly as we did in swing states. So I think a lot of people are trying to look at like, let's blame Trump. I don't know if it's really Trump's fault, and I don't know if it's messaging. I just think it just comes with the territory. When you are relying upon polarization and you're relying upon a cult of personality candidate, this kind of stuff just happens.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very yeah, I think I would agree with pretty much all of that. One thing that I kind of noticed also about the midterms is that it seems like blue areas got more blue and then red areas got more red. And kind of to your point, I think Ron DeSantis is what really, I don't know the correct term for it, but really flew Florida in a more red direction because, as you said, like a cult of personality, everybody knows DeSantis for being this decisive, very decisive and very focused kind of guy and very straightforward. And there's a lot admirable about him in that regards. And I do think people look up to him as kind of like the next Republican leader. And I think that he really carved his path out as that after 2020 and then obviously after the midterms. So yeah, I totally agree with your point. I do think it's about the cult of personality because Rubio is horrible, but I mean he beat, who was that, Val Demings?
Val Demings,
he beat Val Demings like without even breaking. I think it was like over 1 million votes or something like that. Like I mean, it was a complete total knockout.
Right, and that's because again, it was not because Marco Rubio is just some outstanding senator. Like I mean, Rubio's okay, I guess. Like I mean, I'm not his biggest fan, but I mean, he ran alongside a guy who is as popular as a Florida politician. I mean, people don't realize that. I know Charlie Crist became a very much of a pun over the last few months, especially running against a powerhouse like DeSantis. But people forget. He used to be the governor. Like he used to be the governor of Florida, Charlie Crist did. And he's been a congressman. Like the guy was popular in his state for a very, very, very long time.
Well, yeah, real quick, during that debate too, that was the only time where I ever saw DeSantis be really weak because Charlie Crist had called him him out for, wanting to run for president, and DeSantis froze. DeSantis didn't have anything to say. And normally he's pretty good on his toes. He's not as good as Trump, but he can kind of punch back and be pretty precise. But in that moment, he looked pretty weak, at least from my perspective. So in that regards, you would have thought Charlie Crist would have got a lot more credit from the debates after kind of getting DeSantis in a frozen position. But I mean, it was just a complete and total blowout. But I mean, I obviously get why.
Well, it's because of policy. I mean, when you talk, you better do well. If you talk a big game, you better do well. If you talk big, if you talk the game, you better be able to kind of dish it out. And I think that DeSantis talks a big game and he follows it up. I mean, if you look at the policies he's enacted, whether it's against COVID, whether it's anti-corporation, whatever you want to kind of point to, he is good at it. Whether it's education, whether it's immigration, whether it's COVID policy, whether it's just being anti-federal government, like the dude is very, very good. I mean, he's a former House Freedom Caucus member. He is a former military man. I mean, he's very good on a lot of issues. And I think that a lot of the Republican Party are hesitant of the dude because I think he is supported by a lot of the establishment. And I understand why they're hesitant. I wish that DeSantis would be the maverick that a lot of people perceive him to be. I've met Governor DeSantis, and I think he's a great. I think he is the next leader. I'm not sure if he is the next 2024 leader or the next 2028 leader, but I think he is the next leader of the Republican Party. I just wish that he was able to sort of distance himself from the people that want him to run. Like there are so many people in the background chirping at him that want him to run for president, not because they believe in him, but because he's the anti-Donald Trump. And that's what I kind of want him to. I wish he would plug his ears and just do what's well for Florida and move on. I mean, I understand though. Like I mean, if you look at just history, you have to strike when the iron is hot. And I understand he is the hottest thing in politics right now. He is the absolute star of politics right now. On either side, the Democrats don't have a star, but the Republicans have got one. So I understand why he is wanting to at least think about running for president. But just for a few minutes, I wish that he would not listen to the Jeb Bushes or the Bill Kristols of the world and just say, "Hey, what do I actually need to do here? Like, what is the future of my career? Like, is it best for me to run for president right now and potentially get beat in the primary? Or do I need to wait my turn and let the torch be handed to me?" Like actually look at what's going to happen. So, I think a bit back to the overall view of the Republican Party. I think that DeSantis has caught on to kind of just being just a straight talker. Like Zeldin had the benefit of running against possibly the worst gubernatorial candidate that I've ever seen in Kathy Hochul. And I think that she's just terrible. And forgive me if I'm pronouncing her last name wrong, but I don't care.
It don't matter.
I don't care if it's Hochul or Hochul. I don't really care because she's horrible. But Zeldin had that benefit of running against a horrible candidate. But I mean, people, like I said, paint Crist out to be a horrible candidate. I don't think he was really that bad. I just think that DeSantis was that good. That's really what I believe. It's just like you saying that Crist pointed out some of his weakness during the debate. I mean, the fact that I didn't even know about that. I didn't watch the debates and I didn't even know about that. Yeah. The fact that I didn't tells me a lot of what I need to know. That's how good DeSantis' campaign and how good his policies.
Exactly.
That's all he needed. He didn't need to do well in debate. I admire him for even debating at all. If that was the case, he's going to win 20 points. I bet he never would have debated at all. Mm-hmm. So I think that politics is just it's very strange right now because you don't see a lot of partisanship, but you don't see a lot of that intra-party fighting. But I think intra-party fighting is a good thing oftentimes. Like I think primaries are good. It's ironing sharper than iron. I think the Sinema situation in Arizona is fascinating. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see somebody. I mean, you're seeing somebody like Kristen Sinema, who I want to tell people, she is not a moderate. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at Kristen Sinema's voting record, but she's not a moderate at all. Like she votes 100% in line with what Biden wants oftentimes, besides like on the Build Back Better stuff. Like she votes pretty much 100% line more than even somebody like Joe Manchin does. Or she votes more in line than somebody like Murray from Washington votes. Like she is not a independent voice at all. But the fact that she had been chased away from her own party, and now she's holding her party to the fire, right? Like she is going to run as an independent. And if the Democrats run somebody against her, they are handing that seat to Republicans because of how much they hate her. Like people, that is a fascinating thing. We're going to see what the American people truly think of partisan politics in that election, because if they vote for the Republican and the Democrats vote against Sinema solely because she doesn't have a D beside her name, then they are sacrificing their own pride. They're sacrificing their pride for a Senate seat, which we're bringing on, baby. Please run somebody against her. Give us a Senate seat back, and let's run somebody over there that's even better. We're seeing a real test, and we're seeing a lot of experimentation done on how far partisanship is going to go and who is going to be held accountable. And it seems like Republicans are holding themselves a lot more accountable than Democrats have been in the last few years. And I think it's a fascinating development.
Yeah, I agree. And I couldn't agree more about how interesting the intra-party fighting is. I think that's a very, very healthy thing as well. Excuse me. So, one thing that I kind of want to run past you, and I'm sure that you've talked about this quite a bit, when it comes to 2024 between the Republicans, you won't find a person who criticizes Trump more than me, but I'm going to be honest, I really do prefer Trump over DeSantis. DeSantis's foreign policy and his time in Fallujah and Guantanamo Bay, from the stories that I've heard, and they're just anecdotal accounts, so I'm not run to the bank with them. It's very concerning. And then if you look at his foreign policy record, I mean, it would be indistinguishable from Marco Rubio other than Syria in 2013.
Sure.
That being said, he's phenomenal in Florida. The only thing that a governor really has when it comes to foreign policy is, deploying the National Guard in the event of a draft or, another war or something like that. So I don't think he would be good in that regards, but other than that, he's great as a governor. So that being said, I feel like Trump has a little bit less instincts for the empire, whereas DeSantis's instincts are for the empire. So, I know you didn't want to hit on this too much, but hopefully I'm kind of approaching this a little bit of a different angle than most people do. Do you think that putting DeSantis as president is going to return Republicans back to George Bush 2.0? Because that's kind of how it looks to me. And I understand why people would be hesitant to use that language. Or do you think everybody's going to go back to Trump? I feel like this is a very, very tough thing to parse out because Trump's lost favorability due to, his COVID policies and, the pushing of the vaccine, and then his candidates that, his endorsements just weren't that great. And DeSantis has gained a lot of favor because of pretty much the exact same things, minus the candidates, just over the last 2 years. So I don't know what 2024 looks like, but I'm curious about your thoughts overall, and perhaps, if Ron DeSantis is a step back when it comes to the presidency.
So I'll answer that in a couple different ways. Okay.
Sure.
So first, a prediction. 2024, I think Trump wins. Ultimately, that's at least my viewpoint from right now. And I don't think it's an evidence of how 2022 ended up going in terms of the general elections. People could say all they will to how Trump's lost the party, but we lost the party with his candidates because Republicans are voting for his candidates. So I don't understand how he's lost the party if there still are nominees. Like, that means they voted for who Trump told them to vote for, let alone when Trump actually runs himself. So I think Trump beats whoever runs against him, barring he's barred from running for some reason for a crime or something. I doubt that happens, but God, especially with the Congress in control of Republicans now, but God forbid the DOJ and the deep state gets something on him. That's entirely possible.
All right, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled with the show's new sponsor. I am now sponsored and have an affiliate through LMNT electrolytes. I've used these electrolytes for years. Back when I used to do a lot of fasting, in fact, I used to drink, sometimes I want to say up to 7 a day, 7 little packets. So the packets are full of all the electrolytes that you need to perform and hydrate yourself properly. You need sodium for pretty much every single function in your body, despite what a lot of people may tell you. Sodium doesn't actually cause a lot of the issues that people kind of would have you believe. So just real quick to give you a little bit of facts. You don't need sugar to hydrate. Electrolytes and water don't require glucose to pass through the gut. The average American consumes over 60 pounds of sugar a year. And when it comes to athletic performance, you can actually lose up to 7 grams per day in hot climate. So make sure you click on the affiliate link below to get all your hydration needs. And like I said, I'm super stoked to have these guys teamed up with the podcast, and just make sure you get your electrolytes through Element. All right, guys, thanks.
But I think Trump would win. I don't necessarily think DeSantis would be a step back in terms of Bush era politics, and it's not because of Ron DeSantis. Okay, so it's not because of Ron DeSantis' past. There are plenty of things that are concerning about his foreign policy record, and there's plenty of things concerning about his backers, his donors, and what have you. I don't think the Republican Party, as it currently stands, would let him be that bad on foreign policy, because I think that the Republican Party has changed in that regard. Even in 2021, I mean, we saw we saw basically the Freedom Caucus plus 20 vote again for the repeal of the AUF, like I was talking about earlier. And that, let alone how that's going to change now that more freshmen have been elected in this term. And then 2024 happens, and then more get elected. Like, we're never going to be, unless something drastically changes, like we are bombed, and then like everybody goes neoconservative like we did in 2001. Like, but barring something like that happening, I just don't see the Republican Party ever returning to the pro-war party of the 2000s. I don't see that probably ever happening again. Like I said, barring some catastrophe. I mean, you're seeing even people who have been in Congress for a long time vote against it. I mean, and these new Republicans, every time they're elected, I mean, you have your Marcus Luttrells out of Texas, or your Tony Gonzalez's out of Texas, who are always going to vote with pro-war because they served, and whatever. Like, we'll deal with that. But like Anna Paulina Luna from Florida, Byron Donalds, Nancy Mace, which I don't like Nancy Mace, but she, she's good on foreign policy. I mean, there's just so many other new breed Republicans: Green, Boebert, Gates, Mass. I mean, there's so many examples of so many anti-war Republicans, and especially, I mean, look at the negotiations. What I said a few minutes ago. Republicans. Let's look at the significance of this. The Republicans voted for a defense spending cut as part of their negotiations. So the same Republican Party that was the party of George Bush in just 15 to 20 years is now voting for cuts to national defense spending. Like, that is unheard of. And I just don't think, and not because of Ron DeSantis again, I just think the Republican Party is now so self-accountable in terms of foreign policy. I don't know about the other issues. I mean, whether it's economics, tariffs, or what have you. But on foreign policy, especially, and as anti-Ukrainian aid, as so many, I've seen so many Republicans, even on the sort of moderate side of the aisle, even Kevin McCarthy went, okay, that's a little too much. Like, even Kevin McCarthy said, we're gonna have to see where this money's going. Like, he wore the Ukrainian flag pin and everything, but even him a couple months ago went, all right, we're gonna have to see where this money's going.
Yeah.
Like we're getting to a point where it's becoming common sense not to do this kind of stuff anymore. So I don't foresee us going so pro-war or pro-interventionist, foreign policy, pro-hawkishness war policy in the future. And it isn't because of Ron DeSantis. I think if you gave Ron DeSantis, besides on Israel and maybe a couple other of different foreign policy points, if you asked him was he for the support of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, he was. By the way, he was for he was for the withdrawal from troops from Afghanistan when he was in Congress, and more later in his tenure, I think 2017 to 2018, but right before he was running for governor. But you also saw him probably get influenced a little bit by MAGA Republicans in the last bit of his terms, right? Like from 2016 2018, he probably changed a little bit. And like you said with Syria, like the fact that we're not seeing just complete interventionist war hawkishness from him and his war voting record probably tells me that he would probably go along with the way the party's eventually going to go to and get anyway. I mean, you're seeing the support from Gates, you're seeing the support from so many others in Florida. I mean, look at the Florida politicians. Look at Byron Donalds, look at Matt Gaetz, look at Anna Paulina Luna, look at Corey Mills. I mean, those four. I mean, I was one of the first people to criticize when Anthony Sabatini was running in Florida. That's who I supported for Florida Congressional District 7. I criticized Corey Mills for sort of having a hawkishness war ad, but then I started tweeting back and forth, and he told me he would have voted against for the resolution that would denounce the war in Yemen, and would have voted against.
Oh, wow.
So somebody that I even perceived to be pro-war, somebody that like ran this sort of veteran, like I fought terrorism overseas and I can fight for you kind of campaign ad, somebody who run those sorts of neocon ads. He DM'd me and said, bro, like, man, I'm as anti-war as anybody, and I will prove to you that I am. And he stood on the stage his first time at his orientation and said, let's see, I'm going to vote against this no matter what it is. Let's see where this money to Ukraine is going. And we're not going to vote for this again as the United States Congress. So even people that I am even perceiving to be pro-war, are not pro-war anymore. So do I believe DeSantis would be a step back? Maybe a little bit more than Trump. Maybe it would be a little bit more step forward to the Bush. And but I don't even know if that's because of his anti-war effort as much as I'm scared of sort of the people that support him, right? Like the Jeb Bushes and everything in the world.
Bad people in his ear.
That would be, and well, bad people solely because they hate Trump. Like that's sort of where I would be sort of scared is he would accept any help because they're willing to help him. And he kind of not looking at their intent of why they're helping him. Like that's my fear. Like I don't fear to like if DeSantis was, if let's just say that in hypothetical that Trump didn't run and Trump got behind DeSantis, then I wouldn't be scared at all. Let's go all in, baby. Like let's go with our star pupil here. But I think there's so many examples that you could look to of people who voted a little bit more pro-war in the past. I mean, I hate to speak ill of the father here, but Ron Paul voted for Afghanistan intervention when he was in Congress, at least on one infiltration. So I mean, do I necessarily think a couple of votes in Congress and some comments sort of dictate what he would be like as president? I don't. I just think the Republican Party has changed so much over the last even 7 years that I would be very curious to see how Ron DeSantis would legislate in foreign policy, because I think the Republican Party would not let him be a pro-war hawk.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. The only place where I get concerned with a lot of these newer Republicans is that they're great on the Middle East until you bring up Iran and Israel. They do have the undying alliance to Israel, which kind of comes hand in hand with being very, very hawkish on Iran. And DeSantis has consistently been pretty bad on this issue as well. And you brought up Corey Mills. He called the war with Yemen a proxy war with Iran, which seemed kind of goofy to me. And he was running against Anthony Sabatini, who I heard him on some podcasts and I liked him. And then the more and more I saw from him, the less and less I liked, like saying that we should execute Cuban leaders. And the key takeaway from 9/11 is a immigration moratorium, like stuff like that. I was like, dude, if you're a Ron Paul guy, you cannot be like this dense. Like, you know this stuff like the back of your hand, but you're just being, it's impressively stupid. So I would have preferred to see him instead of Corey Mills, but I actually didn't know that Corey Mills was kind of running an anti-war, or kind of feeding more to an anti-war side, and then even said that he would vote to end the war in Yemen and also audit the Ukraine stuff. So that's actually something new that I learned, and it is very admirable. So
I mean, and like I said, I mean that I was a guy who was I was literally trashing him. Like I was literally on Twitter going like, "You're a neocon. Vote for it." It was right before this primary. I was like, "Vote for Sabatini," and then I mean, I straight up asked him. I was like, he kind of gave a little bit generic answer. I'm like, I'm going to ask you two questions. Would you vote for the Ukrainian war? Would you vote to stop Ukrainian aid? And would you vote to end the war in Yemen? And I listed the exact resolution that was coming up in the U.S. Congress, and he said yes and yes. I mean, on a live Twitter, tweeted at me and put it in capital letters, yes, I would. So I was like, all right, that's all I've got to hear, buddy. Like you've won me over. If you win, then I'm for you, man. I mean, I that's all I need. And he's been great on everything else, whether it's for the economy or whatever. He's been great. But that's the kind of accountability we need from our leaders. Like that's the sort of conversation. Like I don't want this sort of gray area. I would love if it's one of the smartest things DeSantis could absolutely do would be to address that. If he did run for president, say, I was very pro-war when I was in Congress. My party was very pro-war, but it has changed. We have changed. We are the anti-war party now. Mm-hmm. The Democrats want to give endless Ukrainian aid over to Ukraine, regardless. They wanted to keep our troops overseas as long as they could in recognition of 9/11 as an anniversary. They wanted to kick back the withdrawal date that Donald Trump set. Like all you would have to do is just address your failures, address your party failures, put it off on the Democrats for being the pro-war party, and go forward. Like, just say the party has changed and so have I. That's more admirable than anything. Absolutely. I mean, to me, when you can admit that you're wrong, and especially when you're wrong about something that is popular with most Americans, like say that. Like just be like, and I mean, the dude allows medical marijuana in his own state, right? Like DeSantis isn't this old-fashioned sort of 80s George H.W. Bush Republican. Like I think that he has adapted with the times. Like he's changed even as a governor. Like I'm sure there are things that he thought within the first of his term that he said that was wrong. Like he's learned in the duration of his governorship, I'm sure he's changed his mind on a lot of things. So I just think that we have to look at how somebody has changed, if they have changed, and kind of how they adapt. And I think that if we've seen as good as a governor as Ron DeSantis has been, because I thought DeSantis was going to be the run of the mill governor. When I heard he was running, I'm glad he beat Andrew Gillum, or Gillum, however you pronounce his name.
Like a crackhead.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I mean, when I heard he beat him, I was like, "Oh, great! Like a swing state governor, that's cool." Like I didn't have this sort of overwhelming reaction, like, "Oh my God, Ron DeSantis won!" I didn't have that reaction. I was like, "Oh, yeah. Cool," because he was not that great of a candidate, but he changed into the Ron DeSantis we know today. So I would be interested to see the Ron DeSantis presidential guy, whether that's 2028, whether it's 2024. Let's just see sort of how he campaigns. If he campaigns as a war hawk, then I'm wrong. Like I was absolutely wrong. But if he is sort of giving these, he would not even have to be a Ron Paul, Matt Gaetz anti-interventionist. Just say, I'm for withdrawal, I'm for ending Ukrainian aid, and let's not start any new wars, and you've got my support as a Republican, dude. Like, don't be like Bush and don't be like Liz Cheney, and we're good. Let's go. Like be good enough on foreign policy, and let's roll forward. And let some of your other give the war and the war responsibilities over the U.S. Congress like it's supposed to be anyway for declarations, and let's go. Don't sort of don't assassinate a random somebody who's going to get us into a war, and don't try to put boots on the ground to protect Taiwan, and we're good. Like let's roll forward. So just I would just be interested to see how it would be. I don't think it's necessarily anything that I worry about unless he was campaigning like that. So
sure. All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I would. If Ron DeSantis came out and renounced his foreign policy record, admitted that he got it wrong, and said that he wanted to stop all aid to Ukraine and that he didn't want to escalate with China or continue to give a endless check to Israel, he would garner a lot more of my support, to be completely honest, because I think that's what's sorely needed today in politics. So I know we're on not a tight time limit, but I want to give you a little bit of time to take a breather. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed this a lot, actually, and I've learned quite a bit. I'm probably going to have to go back through this again because you gave me a lot more to be optimistic about with the Republican Party. And I've had Tho Bishop on, Buck Johnson, a ton of guys who are a bit more keen to the Republican Party. And this has definitely opened my mind a little bit more. So I always appreciate these kind of conversations. So Ken, if you don't got anything else to plug, I got a couple last questions for you and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, go ahead and fire them off, brother.
Cool. What does liberty look like to you?
Liberty to me looks like growing liberty means giving people their individual rights back and letting people make their own decisions. I mean, whether that comes to marijuana, whether it comes to just using their own taxpayer money and then not going to the federal government for useless advantages, trying to give more power back to the states, right? Like letting them make their own decisions, whether that's on marriage, whether that's on drugs, whether that's on red light cameras, whether that's on anything you could think of. Give the power back to the states, put it on ballot measures for people to vote on. Trying to make sure that, not trying to have government interference, but protecting people from the elite, like trying to make sure that people have access to their own rights, whether that's free speech, whether that's freedom to their guns, whether that's being able to say what you want to without punishment, whether that is not making somebody take a vaccine, whether that's not making somebody do anything dictated by a corporation or dictated by the government, just giving people their individual rights back. Liberty overall means the freedom to express yourself and the rights to the pursuit of happiness. And I just want people to be able to freely do that without interference by the elite. And I think that, when you hear the elite, you think, again, like I said earlier in the podcast, billionaires, millionaires, stuff like that. But it's not just that. It is just the ruling class. Like it is the bureaucrats. It is the congressional members. It is the president. It is the cabinet members. Like we have so many different people who have far too much influence and far too much power over us as individuals and as American citizens. And whatever the Republican Party can do to ensure that people have the right amounts of liberty and not be dictated by people who either have more money than them or more power than they do to live, how to live their lives. That's what liberty means to me. The voice for liberty is holding people accountable, and whether that's Republicans holding each other accountable, or whether that's Republicans holding Democrats accountable, or whether that's the Democrats, like the Democrats like Tulsi Gabbard holding neocons accountable for their foreign policy. I don't really care who's holding who accountable, but as if politicians or people that we elect to office are holding each other accountable for American lives being lost overseas, whether that's taxes that are basically putting Americans in the ground when it comes to economics. I mean, there are so many different ways that we can ensure that liberty is protected. And I just want people to be able to live their life, man. Like I want people to be able to live their life without having to worry about the government bringing down their neck or worrying about corporations, pretty much corrupting their children or the elite corrupting our children. Like, be able to live the American dream without this sort of, this convincing that we are racist, that we're fascist, that we're communists or socialists for that matter. Let people make up their own minds. Like, just allow people to thrive is my definition of liberty.
Beautiful. Where can everybody find you?
You find me on Twitter. That's where a lot of people know me off of, at least, is at KD Cody, TN, and that's the TN is for the great state of Tennessee. I'm the chairman of the Republican Party here in Cocke County. If you're ever visiting, I'll take you out to lunch. If you're ever visiting here, that goes to anybody on the podcast. Shout out to me. I'll take you to a really good Southern restaurant. You can find me on Facebook at Kenny Cody. Just type in my name and you'll probably be able to find me if you can recognize my youngest baby face. You can find me on Instagram. I think it's like at KDC3rd. You'll probably be able to find me if you just type in Kenny Cody there too. If you want to archive all my stuff, it's at muckrack.com. It's a journalist archive that you can find. Pretty much every article that I've ever written is there, archived somewhere on the website. And I've written pieces for the Washington Examiner, the National Pulse, Daily Wire, townhall.com, newsmax.com, Tennessean, and the Knoxville News Sentinel and the Libertarian Republic. And if you just want to DM me, just talk about anything you want to talk about, man. I can't promise your viewers that I'll get back to all of them in a timely manner, but I will do the best I can. Just keep on reading my stuff, man. I'm honest about it. I'm not paid to write. I do it all for free. I just want people to hear my voice, hear my opinions, and hopefully people that are like-minded can change the Republican Party for the better.
Nice. Well, I agree with a lot of that. And yeah, like I said, I'm totally glad you come on today and discuss the Republican Party as it is today, because like I said, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and a lot of stuff that gives me hope for the future. So yeah, man, if you don't got any other final thoughts, we'll close her out.
Well, God bless, brother. I appreciate it. One of the better conversations I've had on a podcast. I hope your podcast grows, and I hope you have people on that are spreading the message of liberty.
Of course. Well, I hope so as well. So for sure, make sure everybody listening, you like, subscribe, and share. I should always plug it at the beginning of the show, but I'm an absolute moron, so I never do. And make sure you go check out Kenny's stuff. He's a fantastic writer, and hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as well. So we'll definitely do it again. And until next time, everybody, take care.